Hey everybody, before I dive in, I do want to apologize in advance for the audio. The sound is kind of all over the place in this video because I use this lavalier mic, the camera body mic, and my headset for various parts of the video. The house is in a bit of a state due to the holidays, so I don't have all my gear readily available to set up. Thanks for understanding, now let's get on with the video. I really like mATX motherboards. They're smaller so they can fit in a wide variety of enclosures. They also tend to be cheaper than their larger ATX siblings, mostly because they have fewer PCIe slots and SATA ports or other features. But there's always a by16 length and speed PCIe slot for a powerful GPU, and usually 2 or more additional slots for an add-in card, be it a sound, video capture, Wi-Fi, or an NVMe PCIe storage card. I might even go so far as to say the mATX motherboard is the perfect form factor for the PC builder with a small to medium-sized budget, regardless of their use case, be it gaming, programming, content creation, or school or office work. As I've said many times before, you don't always have to spend the most to get what you need. So come on over and let's see if Gigabyte's B550M Aorus Pro-P packs enough features into its small mATX form factor. Welcome to the middle of nowhere. Let's have a quick look at the box before we open the Gigabyte B550M Aorus Pro-P. As with most Aorus products from Gigabyte, we have the usual black and orange color scheme. The giant eagle logo doing a curl screams either speed or the US Postal Service. And of course we have the motherboard model clearly listed, as well as some pertinent information such as the CPU socket, compatibility, and being 3rd gen Ryzen ready. If you're like me and are often confused by the CPU generations, considering the 2000 series CPUs were a plus and not a true generation leap like 2000 to 3000 or 3000 to 5000 CPUs were, 3rd gen does indeed mean Ryzen 3000 series CPUs. 4th gen is Ryzen 5000. As such, if you want to know if your motherboard is Ryzen 5000 ready out of the box without needing a BIOS update, be sure it has a Ryzen 5000 ready or 4th gen AMD Ryzen desktop ready sticker on it. And as you can see, this one doesn't, so more than likely, even though I got it in January, it will probably need a BIOS update. Hopefully not though. Each side of the box has some additional information on it and repeats what's on the front. So here we got there. And here we have, in addition to the model and all the other good stuff, is just kind of the version. So we have Rev 1, some little blurbs about it. We have a QR code for the check number, serial number, obviously. Unfortunately, I still don't see maybe a BIOS indicator, like what version is on there, which is a shame. Now we have the heat going, so you might be hearing that. On this side, we have in various languages, just some, again, the features of the motherboard. And again, there we go. We flip it over. The back of the box dives even more into the motherboard's features, includes some color pictures, and has 2 QR codes. The left QR code takes you to the product specification page, and the right one takes you to the Aorus Club, where you can register your product for warranty management, as well as join the club to earn some Aorus points and other things like that. If, unlike 99% of most users, including myself, you look at this lid before fully opening it, so right here, you'll see a message in various languages from Gigabyte about the package's environmental impact. The message reads, "To reduce the impacts on global warming, the packaging materials of this product are recyclable and reusable. Gigabyte works with you to protect the environment." This is a fantastic sentiment, and while you can recycle the main box and any paper products within, I wonder how many little plastic baggies or plastic peels, excluding the anti-static bag for the motherboard, as I consider this essential, Gigabyte used. Let's find out. When you first open the box, you'll see the motherboard in an anti-static bag. It's resting in a removable cardboard insert. Under that, you'll find a user manual. Inside that, it looks like we have our driver's disc. We have a case badge sticker with some 3M adhesive, so that's nice. And in a plastic bag are 2 SATA cables, one of which is 90 degrees. Let's open up the motherboard itself in the bag. It just comes right out. You can see that the screws for the M.2 slots are already pre-screwed in, so they're not in plastic bag, which is nice. There is one plastic peel here. There isn't one on the I/O shield. So really we're looking at 2 bits of plastic from this peel and the bag holding the SATA cables. There are no other frills with this motherboard, such as RGB extension cables or anything else. Other than the plastic CD, which most find useless, and the bag-wrapped cables and that peel, Gigabyte did not include a lot of plastic waste. I give it an A-. Seriously though, it's time companies start including drivers on a little 2 gig USB drive and not a CD. Format it to FAT32 so it can double as a BIOS updater's device as well. As for looks, the motherboard is all black. There are no RGB lighting zones and no orange accents you might expect to find on an Aorus motherboard. The only lighting on the board is this RGB strip right here, which shields the onboard audio from the rest of the motherboard. This is controllable via Gigabyte's RGB Fusion software. While many motherboards have this strip separating the audio, Gigabyte seems to be the only one to have it light up, which I find kind of unique and cool. The integrated VRM heatsinks are also solid black. They are not connected by any kind of heat pipe, but they are rather thick. They have an angular and kind of brushed aluminum aesthetic to them as well, which is kind of neat. The trace lines on the board are a lighter black, and they can't really be seen unless you really kind of get a good lighting on them. So really this board is very stealthy for the most part. The chipset heatsink does have the Aorus logo on it, and it's in a light silver or almost white color, and it also does not light up. On the back of the motherboard, you won't find anything really fancy. You have the CPU bracket here, the model number, and some other text. Design in Taipei and some regulatory information as well. And then you can see how the integrated I/O shield screws in, and then some other screws as well, should you want to take anything off for cleaning or whatever else. Also, you can get a better look at that LED strip or separator strip for the audio. The Gigabyte B550M Aorus Pro-P definitely does not have a design that screams, "Look at me!" It's subtle without really any bells and whistles. There aren't many accessories beyond what is required to help you complete a build. You do get a case badge, which is nice, as well as a nifty coaster for your frosty beverage of choice. The included manual covers all you need to know about the motherboard, as well as installation instructions and some information on the BIOS. As I said before, basic users will find the BIOS information helpful, while veterans may want to have additional information provided. Because the motherboard doesn't have all those bells and whistles a more expensive motherboard has, the manual's thinness is not a bad thing here. That's it for what's in the box. Let's go over what this motherboard offers.
The Gigabyte B550M Aorus Pro-P motherboard is a mATX and measures 244mm by 244mm, and it should fit in any ATX compatible case. It has a 2x copper PCB design, which according to Gigabyte provides lower temperatures, better overclocking, better power efficiency, and lower impedance compared to motherboards with only 1x copper layer. Because this isn't explained in depth, I did some additional research and found that having more copper or thicker copper traces will allow for better conductivity. On the surface, this would back up Gigabyte's claims mentioned above, but it's also been regarded as marketing bull because having 2x copper has more or less become standard for many years now. Marketing, am I right? You can also see which revision of the motherboard you have by looking at the lower left corner. You can see here that I have revision 1.0. Knowing the revision is helpful as later ones will have a newer BIOS. The Gigabyte B550M Aorus Pro-P supports Ryzen 5000 and 5000G, 4000G, and 3000 series CPUs. Depending on when you bought your motherboard, you may need to do a BIOS update to use a Ryzen 5000 or 5000G CPU. As of the F10 BIOS update released September 18, 2020, Ryzen 5000 series CPUs gained support, so if you bought this motherboard after that, you should be fine. The F13 update saw Ryzen 5000G series CPUs get support, and that came out July 13, 2021. If you think your CPU might not be compatible or you already installed your Ryzen 5000 CPU and RAM and cannot get the system to post, the Pro-P does have a QFlash button which will allow you to update the BIOS with a USB drive. There does not seem to be support for Ryzen 2000 or 1000 series CPUs with this motherboard. You'll find 4 slots for your DDR4 memory on the Aorus Pro-P with dual channel support, and you can install up to 128GB of RAM should you need that much. The motherboard also supports a wide variety of RAM speeds starting at 2133 megatransfers all the way up to 4733. My recommendation is to find the right speed to price balance. Go with a 3600, 3800, or 4000 speed kit. Those are the main speeds you can keep a 1-to-1 ratio on the Infinity Fabric, which is important with Ryzen CPUs. As always, I still recommend sticking with a DDR4 3600 CL14 or CL16 RAM kit, as these are the most affordable. Remember, faster RAM speed tends to not only be more expensive, but also have slower CAS latency timings, thus erasing any advantage those faster speeds might provide. On a side note, if you only have one RAM stick, insert it into slot A2 or the second slot away from the CPU. If you're using 2 sticks of RAM, install them into slots A2 and B2 or the second and fourth slots when going away from the CPU to take advantage of dual channel speeds. Always try to get a 2-stick RAM kit over a single stick to take advantage of the performance increase dual channel mode provides. There are 3 PCIe slots on the Aorus Pro-P. The top slot is by 16 in speed and length and is for your graphics card. If you're using a Ryzen 3000 or 5000 series CPU, you'll be able to take advantage of the Gen 4 PCIe speeds these CPUs provide. If you're using a Ryzen 4000G or 5000G series CPU, you will be restricted to PCIe 3.0 speeds. This slot also features Gigabyte's ultra-durable PCIe armor, which, much like Asus's safe slot technology, is a metal reinforcement to prevent heavier GPUs from sagging as much or even breaking the PCIe slot. You'll find this feature on many mid-tier and higher motherboards. The second PCIe slot is by 1 in length and speed, and the third is by 16 length but by 4 in speed. Both of these slots are PCIe 3.0 enabled and powered by the B550 chipset. For those of you who love the fanciful lights RGB brings, you can take advantage of the 5 RGB headers on this motherboard. There are 2 4-pin 12-volt RGB headers, 2 5-volt ARGB headers, and 1 CPU LED header on the Aorus Pro-P motherboard. The CPU LED header is a 12-volt 4-pin header and is conveniently located to be near the CPU cooler. I would have loved to have seen an ARGB header right next to it for those coolers that have addressable RGB lighting. While there are no lighting zones on this motherboard, the audio trace does light up and adds a bit of flair to an otherwise blacked out motherboard. You can control any RGB peripherals connected to the motherboard and that lighting strip on it using Gigabyte's RGB Fusion 2.0 software. It has a variety of presets and you can sync your PC's lighting to peripherals, coolers, and RAM. Hate RGB? Simply turn the lighting off via the app. You will find a total of 5 4-pin PWM fan headers on this motherboard. 1 CPU fan header, 1 water cooling CPU fan header, also known as CPU optional, and 3 system fan headers. All fan headers can deliver up to 2 amps or 12 volts at 24 watts. This means all the fan headers can support an AIO pump, any PWM D5 or DDC pump, as well as high performance fans. The Aorus Pro-P has 4 SATA 3 6 gigabit per second ports and 2 M.2 slots. You can install SATA or PCIe M.2 drives in either slot. The top M.2 slot can operate at PCIe 4.0 by 4 or by 2 speeds should you have a Ryzen 5000 or 3000 series CPU. But if you're using a 3000G or 5000G series CPU, it will run at PCIe 3.0 by 4 or by 2 speeds. PCIe drives in the bottom slot will only run at PCIe 3.0 by 4 by 2 speeds. If you need PCIe 4.0 speed for creative work, my suggestion is to put your OS on a PCIe 3.0 drive and insert it into the bottom slot while reserving the top M.2 slot for your scratch disk and a PCIe 4.0 capable NVMe M.2 drive. Only the top M.2 slot has a heatsink to help keep your drive temperatures down. Drive lengths supported are as follows: 42mm, 60mm, and 80mm, and 110mm for the top slot, 42, 60, and 80mm for the bottom slot. For those looking to set up a RAID array, the 4 SATA 6 gigabit per second connectors support RAID 0, 1, or 10. While there aren't nearly as many internal I/O options on the Aorus Pro-P compared to a larger ATX or a more expensive motherboard, you'll still find what you need. The standard 24-pin ATX main power connector is in the usual spot at the side of the motherboard, and the 8-pin ATX 12-volt power CPU connector is at the top left. There is no 4-pin supplemental power for the CPU, but this shouldn't pose a problem. When I temporarily paired my Ryzen 9 5950X with a motherboard that only had a single 8-pin CPU connector, I had 0 issues. There are 2 internal USB 2.0 headers and 1 USB 3.2 Gen 1 header at the bottom of the motherboard. There is no internal USB Type-C header on the B550M Aorus Pro-P, so you may want to consider a different motherboard if your PC case has a Type-C port and you want to use it. As always, I recommend looking into a low-profile adapter for the USB 3.2 Gen 1 cable due to its bulkiness. It makes cable management easier and will make your PC build look cleaner. I put a link to one in the description below. You'll find your front panel audio connector on the left of the motherboard. It has support for HD audio, so do be aware if you have an older case that uses AC97 audio for the front panel connector. Moving past the 2 RGB headers we already discussed, you'll find a COM serial port header. This header allows you to plug in a serial port cable, which then lets you use serial port devices. I'm going to go out on a leap here and say 90% of users won't ever need this. Next to the COM port is the TPM header. As you may or may not know, Windows 11 requires users to have hardware or firmware-based TPM to use the OS. Luckily, most modern CPUs have an FTPM or firmware-based TPM, and this includes Ryzen 3000 and 5000 series CPUs. Want to have a hardware-based TPM? Then you'll need to buy a module and install it into this port. And you'll want to buy the GC-TPM 2.0_S TPM module. I put a link in the description below to the product page. If you're curious about what TPM is and what you can do with it, be sure to check out my video on the subject. Backing up for a second, to the left of the COM port, you'll find a THB_C header. This is a connector used should you get a PCIe Thunderbolt card for your PC. Gigabyte offers a model compatible with the B550M Aorus Pro-P called the GC-Titan Ridge Rev 2. This is pretty cool as the card not only has a Thunderbolt 3 port, but also a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port. Adding Thunderbolt can open up some options for those needing to have insane data transfer speeds. It's a PCIe 3.0 by 4 card and would fit into the bottom PCIe slot of the Aorus Pro-P. On the very lower right side of the motherboard is the front panel header, and above that, the clear CMOS jumper. Here you can plug in any provided front panel cables from your case, such as for the power and reset buttons, hard drive activity light, etc. There are also connection points for an internal speaker and chassis intrusion connector as well. Because there is no clear CMOS button, you'll need to bridge the 2 pins to clear the CMOS. This is easy to do with a screwdriver. Just be sure your computer is off and unplugged first. As with many of the B550 motherboards, you won't find any onboard power, reset, or clear CMOS buttons on the Gigabyte B550M Aorus Pro-P motherboard, or on the rear I.O. If you absolutely need onboard power, reset, and clear CMOS buttons, then I suggest you look at X570 motherboards or a more expensive B550 motherboard. There is neither a Q code reader nor troubleshooting LED lights on the B550M Aorus Pro-P motherboard. While I don't expect a Q code reader on a mid-tier B550 motherboard, I am surprised by a lack of troubleshoot LEDs. This is also disconcerting as they serve as a valuable method of figuring out what might be wrong with your PC if it won't boot. If you absolutely must have some kind of onboard troubleshooting indicators, then this may not be the motherboard for you. The audio on the Gigabyte B550M Aorus Pro-P uses the Realtek ALC1200 codec for the rear audio and supports high-definition audio for the case connection. With this audio, you can have 2, 4, 5.1, or 7.1 channel surround sound. There is also an SPDIF out on the rear I.O. should you want to connect a higher-end audio component to your PC, such as a receiver. Other features touted by Gigabyte include the use of high-end audio capacitors and audio noise guard, which separates the board's sensitive analog audio components from potential noise pollution at the PCB level. I can't speak as to how effective this is as I just don't have the means to test it. For me, one of the features that sways me to buy a motherboard is how jam-packed that rear I.O. is. I'm a USB hog, so the more USB ports there are, the happier I'll be. Additional things you'll want to look out for is the LAN solution and available audio ports. One of the first things you'll notice with the Gigabyte B550M Aorus Pro-P is the integrated I.O. shield. I love this feature, and I'm glad to see it on more and more motherboards, even the less expensive ones. When it comes to USB ports, there are 10 in total. You'll find 4 USB 2.0 or 1.1 ports at the top, there are 4 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, and there are 2 USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, 1 Type A and 1 Type C. The USB 3.2 Gen 1 port that is white is where you'll insert the thumb drive when flashing the BIOS. Speaking of, you'll find the Q-Flash button used to flash the BIOS right above that USB port. Flashing the BIOS should be relatively easy. You don't even need the CPU or RAM installed. However, the trick to finding which BIOS is already on your motherboard can be difficult. You might be able to find it on a sticker on the BIOS chip itself or printed on the back of the motherboard. Get subscribed for a follow-up video where I'll demonstrate how to use the Q-Flash button and flash the BIOS. The Aorus Pro-P has a single Ethernet port which uses the Realtek 2.5 GBE LAN chip. This supports speeds of up to 2.5 gigabits per second and is backwards compatible with 1 gigabit and 100 megabit speeds. If you're using a CPU with integrated graphics and don't have a dedicated GPU, then you'll be able to make use of the display port 1.4 or HDMI 2.1 ports. The HDMI 2.1 port can display a maximum resolution of 4096 by 2160 at 60 Hz. It also includes support for HDCP 2.3 and HDR. The display port supports a maximum resolution of 5120 by 2860 at 60 Hz and can also support HDCP 2.3 and HDR. Having HDMI 2.1 is fantastic should you use this motherboard to set up a home theater PC and you have a TV or projector that can take advantage of those features. Finally, we come to the rear audio, and as previously mentioned, the Aorus Pro-P uses the Realtek ALC1200 codec. There are 5 outputs, including the previously mentioned SPDIF. With these outputs, you'll be able to set up 2, 4, 5.1, or 7.1 channel surround sound. There are separate outputs for the center speakers/subwoofer and for the rear speakers. The line in can be used to connect side speakers, and the line out is where you'll plug in your front speakers. Finally, the mic in can also be used to plug in side speakers. If you plan on keeping things simple and will only be plugging in headphones and a microphone, use the line out and mic in jacks. The Gigabyte B550M Aorus Pro-P motherboard has a 10+2 phase power delivery and uses 2 heat sinks to cool the VRMs. These heat sinks are not connected with a heat pipe and cool their respective parts separately. Unfortunately, I couldn't find much information about how well the power delivery performs or what is used beyond the marketing information on the product page. Having said that, as the Pro-P is an upgrade over the original Pro, which had a well-regarded power delivery, it might be safe to assume the Pro-P also has good power delivery. If you come upon any articles or videos talking specifically about the Pro-P's power delivery performance, let me know in the comments below.
Well, that's about it for the B550M Aorus Pro-P. There's an awful lot of features in this mATX motherboard. As of the recording of this video, you can purchase the Aorus Pro-P for around $149.99 US, but in the past I've seen it for as low as $129.99. This makes it a fairly affordable choice for those PC builders looking to not spend a lot on a motherboard, so they can spend more on other parts like an insanely expensive and hard to find GPU. Some of the features I appreciate the most from this motherboard include the integrated I/O shield, all those USB ports, the Q flash button, and the manual. It's very detailed and thorough in explaining the parts of the motherboard, the installation process, and even hits on parts of the BIOS. Some things I'd like to see on a later revision: troubleshooting LED lights at a minimum, and an internal USB Type-C header. There's really not much else missing that I can think of that I'd expect from a motherboard at this price tier. And that's all I have to say about Gigabyte's B550M Aorus Pro-P motherboard. Get subscribed for a future video where I go over the BIOS, how to use the Q flash to update your BIOS, and do a tour of the utilities Gigabyte offers after you've finished building your PC using this motherboard. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you've enjoyed this video, hit that like button and share any questions or comments you have down below. Show your support for the channel by clicking subscribe, and don't forget to click the notification icon so you don't miss out on any future content. And hey, while you're here, why don't you check out some of the other videos I've made. Your support and feedback are greatly appreciated. I'm Seth, and I'll see you next time in the middle of nowhere.